Welcome, everyone, to the keynote of the Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit. I'm Thomas Wasson, enterprise trucking expert here at FreightWaves, and I'm super excited to be welcoming Todd Spencer, president of the Owner Operator Independent Drivers Association. You may know them as OIDA. And Todd, pleasure to get to talk to you as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive in.
Glad to be part of the show. Actually, my initial experience in trucking started in 1974, just shortly after this organization was formed. And I was basically learning to drive then. In 1976, I bought my first truck, and I joined OIDA then. Didn't really know anything about the organization, but obviously I didn't know really very much about how trucking worked either. And when you own a truck, you find yourself in a position where you better learn all you can as quickly as you can, because not knowing can be very, very, very expensive. And the more I learned about trucking, the more I realized just how at a disadvantage the small operator was, owner operators. Basically, the rules, the regulations, the system was set up for fleets, and with little regard for little guys that owned their trucks. And OIDA was kind of the tool that opened my eyes to how things work, but it also made it clear that if we're going to change things, we have to do it in the right way, in the right professional manner. And it isn't just a matter of changing things when things are really, really bad, because periodically they get that way in trucking. If you want to be treated fair and square, then you better make sure your concerns are always weighed along with others on major policy and regulatory and legislative decisions. And no one else was going to do that for the small operators. So we filled that void, been doing it now for over 50 years. And of course, we know we will never run out of things to do, because DC is filled with people basically that are furthering their own economic interests, and too often them furthering their economic interests comes at the expense of our guys. So we've got to fight like crazy just to keep from losing ground.
It's almost like a battlefield within a battlefield. The informational warfare, especially with Congress, FMCSA, various lobbying situations. And let's talk about that legislation, upcoming, recently passed. Let's start with kind of the review for folks catching up on understanding what's been going on with small fleets and owner operators. What are some of the biggest things that have at least top of mind recently passed, or things that are immediately on the radar that have struck y'all?
Well, actually for us, recent changes of a positive nature are, now it's 2 years ago, the first ever training requirements for commercial vehicle truck drivers, for people to be able to drive trucks. We tell this to various people outside trucking all the time, that pretty much for the life of this whole industry, there has never been any requirements for people that were behind the wheel to have actually gone through any real training to make certain that they can do what they do adequately, and of course, do what they do safely. And, it's stunning, but, 2 years ago, we were able to get the first ever regulations in place. Now, we count that as one of our major victories pretty much throughout the life of the organization, but it's just the starting point, because the key, generally, the biggest factor in crashes and highway safety is going to be the operator of the vehicle. And we know truck drivers, given the right training, the right experience, the right knowledge, are going to pretty much always make the right decisions. We want to make sure that all we share the road with have that ability. And certainly, we think the requirements should be a lot more stringent in this area if you genuinely want to improve highway safety. Now, obviously, we talk a lot about a trucking industry, but there really isn't just one. There are factions within the industry. And of course, when it comes to things like training and things like that, oftentimes we bump heads with others in our industry that basically they're not really interested. They're interested in quickie training that's not very expensive and that allows them to put people behind the wheel quicker. It works in their economic interest to do it. It's a gamble, but they do it, and they do it every day. And everybody out there on the road knows it. We think that's a pretty, if you want to you want to make the papers for spectacular headlines and spectacular crashes, you can do that regularly. You can attract the attorneys. If people behind the wheel are better prepared for the things that they're going to be required to do, they'll be much, much better at it, and our industry will be safer and more professional.
Well, it reminds me of when I worked at a large, asset-based carrier. Some of these mills, they called them CDL Mills. That could be predatory. They don't always. Drivers are spending thousands of dollars, and then the large fleets would typically use a finishing program. And it's something where if you're a small fleet, you don't really have the luxury of someone with less than a year of experience because you can't guarantee the quality. So that's the big win, right? The standardization means that at least everyone now has to be on the same playing field instead of some that we had backing accidents. So we didn't teach them how to back up. We had to teach them that over the road and then incur additional costs on the carrier because of the quality control issues.
That's pretty shocking, isn't it? And the reality is there are all kinds of costs for allowing people to learn as they go down the road. And sometimes those costs are more than just, equipment dings and things like that. They're a whole lot more. And I can certainly share or appreciate the frustration of a small fleet operator that sends a driver out on a trip. When the truck comes back and you look at it and it's all torn up here and there, how'd that happen? And the driver says, I don't know.
It feels that way. I've had some drivers like that. It's like, how did you miss this? Why did you not fill out your pre-trip inspections? Oh, they weren't told right. But speaking of things like workers, shifting gears towards upcoming stuff as well. We have an election year coming up. It's just 2024. I've spoken to some folks who have, I've spoken to Wiley Deck before and a few others. When you come up to an election season and you're looking to try to see if you're passing legislation from OIDA standpoint, are we kind of in the later half? Is this about the fourth quarter if this were a football game where I got to try to get something on the board? Or how do we look into it moving forward when we're trying to see what regulations do I really need to start looking at and focusing on, and which ones are going to potentially become a 2025 after a new Congress, a new executive branch comes in, or a same one if it's an incumbent? How do we shake that out?
Well, I think the unfortunate reality that we have right now is that this particular Congress is totally engaged in election season. And rather than focusing on some of the issues that we would like to see them do, they're pretty much engaged in doing what they think they need to do to retain their seats or get seats, and rather than addressing real issues. And there certainly are many of those for truckers that we'd like to see them move on. Having said that, we also know the world goes on after November. Now, where we are is it doesn't really matter who gets elected. We're going to try do our best to work with whoever is in office and to pursue those things that we think are in the interest of most of our members. And one certainly at the top among those at the top of the list are places for drivers to park. We made progress with the previous Congress in terms of getting money allocated for parking, and there is parking expansion going on in plenty of areas of the country right now, but we need to do far more. The parking situation, the parking shortage for truckers has been an issue for 25 years or longer, and it's only it's only getting worse. And while we have some truck stops that are expanding what they have to offer, and we're thrilled to see that, trucking is key to how our commerce, how our industries work. Because of reliable and efficient transportation by truck, manufacturers have saved millions and millions and millions of dollars because of the trucks and because of the people behind the wheel. But, the people behind the wheel have to have a support system that actually supports them. And we think having some place to sleep safely and securely isn't really a big price to pay. So we're optimistic we're going to make more progress in the area of parking in the next Congress, whenever they sit down to decide to address issues. Another bill that's high on our list because it's a driver issue is that allowing access to bathrooms. As shocking as it is, COVID was probably a big proponent of shippers and receivers deciding that they no longer wanted to allow drivers to use their restroom facilities. We think that's totally unacceptable. Now, it shouldn't never be an issue that you have to approach Congress with, but it is. So we have legislation in the works in Congress now that basically doesn't require anything over the top. It just says whatever accommodation you make for your workers, you must extend it to truck drivers too that are delivering to your facilities. And again, it's kind of shocking that we have to pursue legislation to address such a basic issue. But I mean, that's certainly on our agenda. Lots of other things. The regulatory arena. Oftentimes government's a convenient target when you want to grumble about what government does. But what we find in trucking is there are generally economic interests that pursue regulations that certainly frustrate truck drivers and small businesses in the area of speed limiters. This is something that certainly big carriers especially would like to see. They'd like to see a mandate for that. Now, for many or for all of them, if they wanted speed limiters on their own trucks, that's certainly their option to do that. But they want the mandate to apply to everyone. And, we believe that the person behind the wheel is in the best position to determine what is a safe speed given their situation, which is weather, traffic, all of these other things. And the reality is that regardless of what you drive, there are going to be times when you're going to need to pick up the pace just a little bit. And to get out of somebody's way or to avoid an unsafe situation, we believe well-trained professional drivers are in the better position to make those decisions. And, I can't really think of anything much more frustrating than to be in any kind of a vehicle and basically just sort of be an impediment to other traffic, to be a rolling roadblock. And we know a mandate would turn trucks into that and create frustration and road rage. And, the other folks may claim to be well-meaning, but we're not buying that nonsense.
Well, I think the speed limit regs is so interesting because larger fleets, or you can call them mega carriers or nationwide fleets, or the fancier term enterprise fleets. I always like to joke, depends on what jersey we're talking about here, but favoring things like underride trailer guards, speed limiters, the automatic emergency braking systems being mandated. I mean, do you feel like when we're looking at that, is that one of those big battles between, it's almost like Clash of the Titans getting the attention of congressmen or the various government agencies? Because for a large fleet, you're buying new Class 8s anyway. You're always upgrading them. So this isn't as big a deal than a smaller operation where you may have a used truck or you've paid off your truck, and then now you may have to be financially burdened by being mandated to buy another Class 8 if this stuff is required.
Well, certainly there are many that would use economics certainly as a mechanism of creating obstacles for their competition. And, that's certainly true in trucking, but that's also true in lots of other industries. And, for where we are, and, again, the majority of our members are veteran drivers with years of more than a couple of decades of years of safe driving. They're gonna buy into anything that they believe will improve highway safety. Certainly, addressing the underride aspects of the rear of the backs of trailers. Those are things that we support because nobody wants to see those kinds of accidents. When it comes to the side underride guards, those are real areas of concern because we already have trucks get high centered that get hung up on railroad tracks. There's so many loading and unloading situations, construction areas where trucks and trailers have to go, and you can tear this stuff up pretty easily. And it, once that happens, then suddenly it's not roadworthy. So it's going to create more obstacles. And again, we're open to considering everything, but we've not seen anything to indicate that the side underride stuff will actually will actually have a payback in terms of reducing crashes. Because, while those accidents, crashes do happen, they're pretty rare. And, whenever you do anything, there are always unintended consequences. And, when you're evaluating this kind of an issue, the more stuff you put on a trailer or truck, the more weight you add to it. Bear in mind, we move cargo. So if you end up adding weight, that in essence, the more weight you add to the truck and the trailer, the more trucks and trailers it takes to move the same amount of goods, because that doesn't change. So you put more vehicles out on the road, then suddenly you have a greater opportunity for more crashes, because, that's just how things work.
It reminds me of those glider kits. Now, not the glider kits on the tractors where you get the engine and stuff, but on the trailers where we had the folding out ones for the fuel economy, and then you had the underride glider looking things on the bottom. And I always felt bad about them because it just looks like it was going to catch on something. Is that kind of the same logic of thinking sometimes, where we're saying, well, for the sake of an extra 1 mile per gallon, we're going to add this extra stuff and it's going to get caught on things? I always wondered what y'all's thoughts on those were, because those were interesting. I don't see them as much anymore, but I used to see them a lot where they deploy, but we always tore them off when we backed into docks. So it kind of went away.
Well, that's the reality with the stuff that goes on the back of trailers. That becomes a maintenance issue in itself. And is there a payback? Certainly in controlled situations, you can turn lots of stuff into a payback, but doing it in the real world, it's a little bit more complicated. Now, the side underskirting stuff, that was stuff that actually California started requiring some years back. And basically it is for aerodynamics and wind, but pretty much all, you will periodically see that stuff torn up pretty good, but it's generally pretty flexible stuff. So it can take some bumps and bruises without actually being torn up. So, folks are living with that pretty well, but it seems like a good idea.
I think that's the best point that you all have brought up, especially commenting on regulations and looking ahead, is expectations versus reality. The reality of operating on the road and having a business versus the good intentions of trying to do some of these things. One of the big ones recently was a worker classification. In January, the Department of Labor put out a 339-page final rule. I read a little bit of that. The thing's a beast. Saw a lot in media about concerns over it. Are some of these things from other areas like the Department of Labor, not just Congress, but when we're looking at this trend of regulations, as the FMCSA, Department of Labor, and these other areas, are those areas to watch as we're moving in? Because maybe since they don't have an election season, is that something to look into as well?
Well, actually, we do, and I was thinking that rule was 340 as opposed to 339 pages. Now, I didn't go through all of it. I went through select pages that our people that did go all the way through it basically gave me. Now, we had an opportunity to provide input to the Department of Labor on that, and every suggestion we made, they incorporated. And basically, you hear there's lots that gets reported in the media, and of course, perhaps it's hard for media basically to report things without sort of putting a little bit of spin on it themselves. And, that's not always bad. But having said that, for us, probably the simplest explanation is one I've heard from at least one other, that, the current proposal from the Department of Labor is basically about the way the rule was before it changed in 2021. But it is better in some areas in that it uses about a 6-factor test to evaluate the overall circumstance. It isn't being specific in any particular area. It doesn't use the ABC test. So we think that is certainly an advantage, and it allows for an analysis of the overall situation. And, and of course, we were also able to get some changes in that DOL rule that we believe most drivers would support, or certainly owner-operators would support, in that previously, some of our good friends in the motor carrier industry were able to get some wording in the Department of Labor rule that said basically anything that we would require for what we consider to be safety would not be considered making the driver, the trucker, dependent. They would still be independent. And we think, wait a minute, this whole thing is based, we're supposed to be talking about two businesses that actually are independent of one another. And what you're trying to do is make one of those businesses basically totally toe the line for what you want to see. And then you still want to say we're independent. Well, we don't think so. So we were able to get that situation addressed in the DOL rulemaking. So from our perspective, we believe the finished product is certainly superior to the one that we had previously.
And there's some really fascinating court cases and regulations. Fifth Circuit Court talking about the nature of being an independent owner operator under a large motor carrier. We have California's AB5 ruling and some of the changes brought onto that state. If we're looking from a legal aspect, not only looking at legislation, federal government agencies, but looking at potentially upcoming legal rulings. Is that something where you expect in the next year or two we're going to see more definition? Is that going to be a positive or a negative? I'm prefacing that because when I was in trucking, we had owner-operators, but sometimes it didn't really always feel like they could actually pick their own loads, and it was more like a subsidiary instead of like an actual owner-operator. They treated him like an agent carrier or something.
Well, certainly that goes on. If generally, whoever the players are, if they can, in essence, try to manipulate the system or work the system to their own benefit, they often try to do that. And for myself, I'm a former owner operator, and the people that I trucked with, I mean, I was leased to a carrier. The people that I trucked with, no one was more independent about how they ran their businesses, but there clearly is a line that certainly carriers can go beyond where they take independence away. And we're not going to be in favor of that. And nor should they. And we don't want them abusing the system either. And there are instances in trucking right now where you see significant areas of abuse. One of those that's certainly being scrutinized right now is the area of lease purchase agreements, where anybody that signs a lease purchase agreement, I don't see where there's any independence there at all. And nor would I think anybody else that is just simply an objective viewer. And so, you can't really have it both ways, guys.
Exactly. And they had a panel at the Mid-America Trucking Show in Louisville. When we're looking at the progress of this predatory lease trucking task force, what are some of your thoughts? Is this something where we may see some more positive changes, or more like guidelines and recommendations, or too early to tell?
Well, the lease purchase task force, OIDA, was instrumental in Congress authorizing that, as well as this look at detention, the look at how economics overall affect trucking from the driver perspective. These were all things that we were able to get in legislation that's being mandated. Now, I'm not sure where this goes, but I think there will be some recommendations that will come out of some of these panels that Congress can take a look at and seriously consider the kinds of changes that really need to be made to make these things work better. In the area of lease purchases, this is an area where people are attracted, enterprising people are attracted. They're willing to work hard, and they simply are taken advantage of. And they end up, in many instances, they end up leaving trucking. Right now we hear in many circles, folks like to talk about this driver shortage stuff. And when you look at the numbers of new drivers created every year, when you look at the numbers of drivers that go through driver training programs, carrier driver training programs, we heard from one just within the past 2 weeks that over a span of 20 years had trained 38,000 drivers for their fleet that has 8,000 drivers in it. 38,000 for an 8,000 driver fleet. I mean, that's just crazy. That's just crazy. And the focus needs to be in an area where we attract and recruit good, responsible people. We treat them well, treat them right, and they stay in the business, because experienced drivers are going to be much safer drivers, and there is no substitute for experience. But the only way you get that experience is to stick around. And if the economics, the workforce, the work environment isn't conducive to people coming and staying, well, then we don't get experienced drivers, and we're the worst for it.
Yeah, the whole pipeline. That's the sobering statistic I had was as soon as they graduate and they become a first seat driver, 50% of them don't make it past 6 months, and it costed us $4,000 to $5,000 per driver to hire and seat. So it was like seeing how the sausage got made was not fun. Wrapping things up here, moving ahead, we've got.
Well, and let me point out that is when you crunch those numbers, that's an astronomical cost. Having said that, companies, looking through my driver shortage file, the first big report I hear of was a study done by the ATA Foundation back in the 1980s. It identified basically the same problems that we have today. We don't pay drivers enough and we don't support them enough. This is going back to the 80s. Now, understand, these companies wouldn't operate in this fashion if it wasn't in the end more profitable for them to do it like this than to do the other way. And so that's why they do it. And, again, we can do better, and we should do better. And we shouldn't be open to buying the nonsense. Call it for what it is. They're looking for the least expense. They're looking for people that they can pay the least to and work them for as long as they'll stay. That's what turnover is.
It's a sobering assessment. Disregard the Kool-Aid. Todd, running low on time here, but if folks want to learn more about OIDA, as well as information and what you all are working on, what's the best way to get in contact and find out?
Well, our base website is OOIDA.com. Our activist website is fightingfortruckers.com. I would encourage anyone and everyone to go to that site. If you click on the link for trucking policy, what will come up will be the legislative items that are currently in play that drivers can weigh in, communicate directly with their members of Congress, and influence how this legislation comes out. I mean, it's a tool for truckers to become activists, and I would encourage everyone to take advantage of that. And, again, we're a membership organization. Our members and our members participating in our programs is what funds our Hill outreach, our advocacy efforts. That's what makes it important. We give people an opportunity to do that. And certainly if you're not a member, join OOIDA because we're in it for the long haul and we're in it for the right reasons.
Appreciate your time so much. Thank you, Todd. We'll definitely recommend folks to check it out. That's going to be a wrap for this keynote address, but don't worry, folks, a lot more great content coming up on this Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit.